wrote a book about him, a biography about him, about Rav Shmuel Heller. It's called Harav HaManhig V'Harofe. He was the Rav of Tzfat. He was the leader of all Tzfat's Jews, and he was a doctor. And it's been out of print, and I just got it. And anybody who is interested, contact me, and I'll direct you to it. Okay. So, dear listeners, those of you who are online, you should have links to the class notes. And one for each of you gentlemen.
Thank you.
In the last class, we spoke about the spiritual origins of illness. And today we're going to continue with practical applications in the age of Corona. I want you to know that predating Corona, things were exactly as they are now. And when our Kadosh Baruch Hu, when our Chachamim told us, when Shlomo Melech told us, Ein kol chadash mitachas hashemesh, there's nothing new under the sun, Corona is no different than before. The idea is that there are differences, slight differences in style, but it's all the same. It really is all the same. One of the biggest problems we have today is government intervention, not allowing us to serve Hashem as we want. I spoke in Los Angeles in 2018, and it was a talk entitled Chemical Medicine, Natural Medicine, Supernatural Medicine. And it's about Jewish medicine. It's about what I practice. And from what I have heard, in the last couple of weeks, it was taken off of YouTube.
Really?
Yes. So you'll find, if you look at the last page in the bottom, we have a link to it. So if you want to enjoy it, you'll enjoy it. And it's as practical in 2018 as it is now. Okay. So let's do a little bit of reviewing first. We introduced the idea of spirituality relative to medicine with two Gemaras. The first Gemara was a Gemara in Avodah Zorah, which says that illness is predetermined. And when the time comes for someone to be smitten with illness, a heavenly messenger or messengers are sent, and they're instructed to impose the illness on the person and not to leave the sick person until a certain day, a certain time, with a certain doctor, and using a certain medicine or drug. And we ask the question, why then would it be beneficial to daven, since it's already predetermined? And we answered that this is the beauty of our very personal relationship with Hashem. As the Ramban says, we have a choice of being animals, two-legged animals that function basically according to nature, or we can rise above and we can live in the world, as the Ramban says, of one of God's Chassidim, who Hashem watches over very personally and very lovingly, and whose control and whose influence is constant and constantly made aware and constantly received. I heard a wonderful story last week. There was a miskin, there was a very depressed person who goes to a mashpia, somebody who is a very strong influence, and he asks him, "Why is it that you're always happy?" He said, I'm always happy because I feel Hashem is close to me. And he says to him, when you go to a Chernobyl Chassid, and you ask a Chernobyl Chassid, "Do you know that Hashem exists?" He says, "Sure." "How do you know it?" "Because the Moranayim says so." And he goes to a Lubavitcher, and he says, "Do you know Hashem exists?" "Sure." "How do I know it?" "Because the Rebbe said so." And he goes to a, That's the final one. He goes to a Lelever, and he says, "How do you know it?" "Because the writings are of David Lelev, they tell me." And he goes to all the different Hasidim, and they all say, and he goes to a Breslover, and he says, "Do you know that Hashem exists?" He says, "Sure. I just spoke to him." Because Hashem, it's not just the province of Breslov alone. Hashem is available for us. Karov Hashem l'chol karov. Hashem is close to anybody who calls to him. And so those of us who call to him, we're Hashem's Hasidim. Hashem loves us, and Hashem gives us what we need. And we're able to override that which is quote unquote nature, that which is quote unquote the world of chance. And we feel a very close relationship to him, and he always gives us what we need. Sometimes he directs us in a different direction, but there's still a direction where we can feel him guiding us. Then we talked about another fascinating Gemara. The Gemara in Sukkah tells us that Hashem gave 7 names to the Yetzer Hara throughout Tanakh. And one of the names is Tzfoni. Tzfoni can either mean in wait or anticipation. And the idea that the Gemara is telling us is that we all tend to look at life according to making plans. Life is a novel, it's a sitcom. Everything should go according to a certain way. But things don't often go according to what we expect. And when they don't work out as we hoped or expect, we can be devastated and depressed. And when we get depressed and devastated, that's exactly what the Sitra Achra, the Samach Mem, the Malach HaMamas, the Yetzer Hara wants. Because when a person is depressed, they leave the province of Hashem and they go into his domain. No good is ever found within depression. There are yeshivas that sing and daven every day joyously because it's an opportunity to connect. What do they do on Tisha B'Av? The same, except when the time comes to say kinot, they break into uncontrollable crying. But that's not depression. That's the service of the heart. That's the heart saying, "I long for you, Hashem. I'm not depressed that you're not here, but I want you. I know you're close. I know that if I reach out for you, you'll respond to me." So this dichotomy of living according to nature and the natural means, or davening and rising above nature, there is a tension between the two of them that extends to medicine and illness. And that's what we're going to talk about today. I understand that we don't have very much time. I had hoped that we would be able to, we started this a month or so ago, do Merkava exercises to be able to bring Hashem into us. And I hope in the future we'll be able to. But know that we need to be able, in order to make ourselves a vessel for connecting to Hashem, we need to be alive, we need to be vibrant. And we're going to learn a little bit later from the Rambam in Hilchot Deot, where he speaks about that, but we're going to learn specifically about how not to get sick from the Rambam. So, there are two Gemaras, two more Gemaras that we're going to talk about. One is a Gemara in Ketubot, and one is a Gemara in Nida. The Gemara asks a question. Actually, it starts out with a statement. Hakol bidei shemayim. Everything is in the hands of heaven. Except, what's the except? So if you go to the Gemara in Ketubot, it'll answer the question a little bit differently. Let's read it. The Gemara says, Hatanya, Akol bidei shemayim, chutz meitzinim v'pachim. Everything is in the hands of Shemayim except for tzinim, which some of the Mepharshim translate as traps. I don't remember. No, pachim is traps. Tzinim, I don't remember what it is, but the Gemara says it's not that. The Gemara says that tzinim refers to hitzdananuyot, colds, catching colds. Literally, tzinun means cold. And pachim, which means traps, the Gemara says is just the opposite of tzinin, which are those things that make us cold. They're things that make us hot, or fevers. So everything is in the hands of Hashem except for, you might say, catching a cold or getting a bacterial infection, which is hot. Shenemar, tzinim v'pachim b'derech ikesh shomer nafsho yichak. Cold and heat are in the path of the crooked. Someone who guards his soul will distance himself from them. So in other words, we see from that Gemara that we have a choice whether to make ourselves sick or not. That seems to be in line with our Gemara in Avodah Zarah, which says that the messengers bring down illness, but a person first, if they make themselves a vessel to become ill, that's when the Gemara will apply. And if they're careful, they won't. That's, again, part of living our lives, connecting to Hashem and davening. If we go to the Gemara in Nida also, you find the same Gemara in Brachot. I believe it's also in Megillah. The Gemara says a little bit differently. Let's read it inside. Amar Rav Chanina, Hakol bidei shemayim, chutz me'irat shemayim. That everything is in the hands of shemayim, with the exception of fear of heaven. Shenemar, Ve'ata Yisrael ma Hashem elokecha shel mimcha kim liras Hashem. All that Hashem asks of you is to fear God. And then the Gemara asks a funny question. Fearing God is an easy thing? It's a simple thing? And the Gemara answers, yeah, for Moshe Rabbeinu it was. But what about us? But the truth is, again, if we tune ourselves into the frequency of Hashem, as Moshe Rabbeinu did, and we want to make ourselves connected, we can. There's a wonderful Gemara in Kedushin that says that Mi shemekadesh et ha'isha Omer harayat mekadeshet li al menat sheni tzadik gamor. Somebody who proposes to a young lady and says to her, you are betrothed to me on the condition that I'm a tzaddik gomor. I'm a perfect tzaddik. The Gemara answers that he is considered as mekudeshes. He's considered as betrothed. Why? Because maybe at that particular moment he had a hear-her tshuva. He wanted to do tshuva. Even if he was a totally rotten person. Because it's the thought that a person has that's considered in Shemayim as the most important thing. So too here, with Yiras Shemayim, if a person desires to have Yiras Shemayim, even if they have a big Yetzer Hara, yes, Hakol bidei Shemayim, chutz me'Yiras Shemayim. That's in our hands. Yes. So ultimately, it's our choice. Whether we want to make ourselves one of Hashem's Chassidim and rise above illness, or whether we're going to be beholden to nature, to the malachim, to the tzinim and pachim, the cold and the heat pathogens. So let's take off our hats for a moment and put on our medical hats. And let's define what tzinim and pachim are. And it's really interesting that the definition of tzinim and pachim corresponds to viruses and bacterial infections. Let's look inside. So when we talk about pachim, it's written wrong here. A pachim, or bacterial infections, what do they include? Acute infections with high fever, intense pain in the joints, muscles, and bones, stuffy nose with thick yellow or colored phlegm, painful sore throat, red eyes, intense thirst for cold liquids, strong smelling or burning urination, swollen lymph glands, foul smelling diarrhea with blood, and so on and so forth. All of these things are what happens when we get a bacterial infection. And what are tzinim? What are viral infections? Chronic infections with moderate or low-grade fever, aching bones, joints, and muscles, stuffy nose with clear or light yellow phlegm, a scratchy throat, a sinus infection, brain fog, so things are never really clear, intense fatigue. And one particularly becomes susceptible following immune compromise. So there you have it. Hakol bidei Shemayim, everything is in Hashem's hands except for becoming sick. But what's the difference? Why does a person become susceptible to pachim not nearly as frequently as someone becomes susceptible to tzinim, viral infections? And why is it in our day and age you don't hear so much about super high infections? Maybe you'll find it in small children. But why is it that viral infections have become so prevalent in our day and age? There is a physician and researcher whose name was Dr. Jeffrey Bland. I believe he's in Washington State. And he's called the father of a new type of medicine, functional medicine. And he points out that in our day and age, people aren't dying like they used to 50, 75, 100 years ago or more from serious infections. Because bacterial infections, chronic bacterial infections, I should say severe bacterial infections, are becoming more and more rare. And what's killing more and more people are chronic infections. And you can't take an antibiotic for a chronic infection. You basically have to suffer. What is the difference? The difference between a virus and a bacterial infection is that a bacterial infection can be eliminated fairly rapidly with an antibiotic. You take an antibiotic, it's gone. But most of the time, when people get sick, they don't have antibiotics. They wouldn't work because they have chronic infections. They have viral infections. And what is the nature of a viral infection? A viral infection is one in which pieces of molecular protein attaches itself to a person's body and basically takes over the body. And it doesn't matter if the bacterial infection is chronic fatigue, Epstein-Barr, cytomegalovirus, herpes, or corona. They're all within the realm of viral infections. What are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to look at our lives if we can't just take a pill, an antibiotic, and get rid of it? And Hashem again is speaking to us. And we need to be Hashem's Chassidim and listen to his messages and change our lives. Let's look back to the Gemara again in Ketuvot that says, Akol bidei shamayim chutz mitzinim b'pachim. You can live your life any way you want, but if you do things that'll make you susceptible to getting sick, Hashem will withdraw his province from you, and he'll give you over to a malach or to tzinim b'pachim, usually tzinim. They say that viruses are constantly remaking themselves. Every year there's a different flu. And just like we said in the Gemara in Sukkah that the Yetzer Hara, the Samach Bet, has many names, so too viruses have many names, but it's all the same thing. And you can't protect yourself against them without recognizing that if you don't live according to the life that Hashem wants you to live, you're not going to be protected and you'll keep getting sick. How then do we protect ourselves? The first thing is we need to understand that if we are in the presence of someone who is sick, we need to be able to cover ourselves up and distance ourselves. The 15th principle of Jewish medicine is Yadayim Yaskanu Yasem. Our hands tend to be very busy. And to prevent our hands, which are so busy, from making us sick, we need to keep our hands away from our eyes, our ears, our nostrils, and our mouth. We should throw away tissues when we use them. So that's the first way. And again, we talk about corona being the new virus. It's just all the other viruses, but it's on steroids, so to speak. It's much more contagious and it's much more intense. And all the principles of viruses apply to it. And it'll stay in your body, just like the other ones I mentioned will, and will explode when either you're exposed to it, as I just mentioned, or through other means. The idea that bacteriologists and pathologists in the 19th century, when they discovered vaccines, the idea was to inject a weakened form of the illness into a person to stimulate the immune system. But there is a problem when we don't inject a weakened form of a virus into our immune system. When we inject a DNA form of the virus into our immune system, and those who understand what I'm referring to, I don't want to go into any more details of that, because it can tend to be rather politically incorrect. But when you inject genetic material into us, rather than protecting us, it makes it so that we reinfect ourselves over and over time. Every time we get sick, every time we're weak, every time we haven't got enough sleep, every time we're exposed to someone, we're going to get what they had also. So we need to make sure that we don't get shots to protect our immune system. The third thing we need to do to make sure we don't get sick is to avoid inflammatory foods and substances. That means I was astonished when I realized last week that the water here in Tzfat, in Yerushalayim, many other places, is chlorinated to be able to protect us from pathogens, from amoeba. But chlorine is a toxic chemical. So if you have water, if you're not drinking water from the tap, you still have a problem taking a shower, and you still have a problem when you're washing your hands with it. So try to get, if you can, a filter that will filter out chlorine, and some of them do. There are 4 cardinal signs of inflammation: redness, swelling, heat, and pain. We can see that on the outside of our body when we have a rash, for instance. But you can also have it inside your body. How does that affect us? When we eat inflammatory foods. And how do you know if you're eating an inflammatory food? Very simple. Your muscles get weaker. You might get a little dizzy. Your pulse gets faster. So that's the third way. The fourth way is the most profound way, and with this we'll conclude today. In order to avoid getting sick, we have a choice. And again, it reverts back to the whole discussion we've had today. How do we eat? Do we eat for Hashem, or do we eat for the Samach Mem? And that applies both physically and spiritually. When we eat, when a person is eating something, are you eating for the pleasure of it being yummy? Or are you eating for the pleasure of knowing that Hashem is giving you this delicious food as a gift from a father to a son, or a father to a daughter, or mother to a daughter? Actually, father, because chokhmah is the attribute of Abba. That's where giving comes from. And so we have a choice. Physically, emotionally, spiritually, and mentally. How are we eating? To know how to eat, let's learn the Rambam. The Rambam says as follows in Hilchot Deot, Perek Daled. You'll have some surprises here, so listen very carefully. A person should never eat unless he is hungry, or drink unless he's thirsty. One should not eat to the point where his stomach is full. Rather, he should stop when he's close to 3/4 of full satisfaction. So your mother was always telling you, eat, eat, eat. Didn't know the Rambam. One should not eat until he has checked himself thoroughly and doesn't have to relieve himself. So if you have to go to the bathroom, you're not allowed to eat. He should not eat until he has exerted himself sufficiently to raise his body temperature. In other words, we need to warm our bodies before eating. By walking, by exercising. To go from an activity such as studying or learning and then eating right away is not healthy. It's not what the Rambam suggests. One should always eat while seated. One shouldn't graze and eat. He should not walk around, ride, exert himself, subject his body to startling influences, not take a stroll. And once one has completed eating, one should wait a few minutes until the food is digested slightly. And continues the Rambam. A person who is wise overcomes his desires and is not drawn by his appetites. He should always avoid fruit. I remember seeing in a couple of the books on the Rambam's diet, they say you should have fruit in the morning. Not the Rambam I know. He should not eat fruit in quantity, even when they're dried, and all the more so when they're unripe. And one should never eat carob. Carob. Charuf. All pickled foods are harmful and should be eaten sparingly, and only in the summer and hot climates. In Tzfat, there's a movement to have pickled foods. They don't know the Rambam. Whenever one suffers from constipation or has difficulty moving his bowels, terrible diseases will beset him. And conversely, whoever is idle and doesn't exercise, or doesn't move his bowels when he needs to, or is constipated, even if he eats the proper foods and takes care to follow the rules of medicine that we've mentioned, will be full of pain all of his days, and his strength will fade away. That's the Rambam. Overeating is like a poison to anyone's body. It is the main source of all illness, says the Rambam. Most illnesses that affect a person are caused by harmful foods or by filling his belly and overeating even healthy foods. What about spiritually? That's just physically. The Rambam is giving us halacha. Spiritually, if we see something that we want or desire or crave, as I said, there's no middle ground. You're giving yourself over to your imagination. You're thinking about how yummy that is, how that cake is, how wonderful that food is. You're giving yourself over to the Samach Mem. And this is one of the reasons why a person gets sick. When a person eats in a manner where they're eating gluttonously, one becomes vulnerable to viruses. When one overeats, one becomes vulnerable to viruses. And there's one other part to it. Not honoring our biological clocks. Again, spiritually and physically. That means that if we stay up late, in Chinese medicine they teach that 11 o'clock at night is when the gallbladder channel needs to heal. And anyone who's had acupuncture or knows anything about acupuncture will know that the gallbladder channel goes through the brain. There are 22 points in the brain and in the skull relating to the gallbladder channel. And so if one is up after 11, the brain center is not able to heal, and one becomes vulnerable to illness. What else can affect our brain center? Electromagnetic radiation. When a person is on technology, it's going to cause you to get sicker quicker. As a physician, I've treated literally hundreds of patients with corona. And I've gotten it many, many times. And I pushed myself. You can't push yourself and get away with it. Hashem is talking to you. You're giving yourself over to those malachim, the tzinim and pachim, that'll take you away from Hashem, from taking you away from being one of Hashem's Chassidim. So I want to just end today with a wonderful Gemara. A Gemara about Chinese medicine and really about Jewish medicine. The Gemara relates that Rabbi Yehuda permitted someone to apply what was called kechol on his eyes on Shabbos. Now, in the time of the Gemara, kechol, which we identify as mascara, was a medicinal herb that was used to treat eye infections. So it had the joint purpose of dyeing the eye blue, making a woman attractive, but also treating an eye infection. So Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda said to the Chachamim, one who listens to the ruling of Rabbi Yehuda and allows having kechol in their eyes desecrates Shabbat. What happened? What goes around comes around, right? So Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda came down with a terrible eye infection. So he sent a message to Rabbi Yehuda asking, is it permitted for me to treat my eye on Shabbat? Rabbi Yehuda said, for everyone else, it's permitted. But for you, because you viewed my psak halacha with disdain, you can't. And Rabbi Yehuda continues, what is the source of allowing the eye to be treated on Shabbos? And he brings down, there was a maidservant who was in the house of Mar Shmuel, whose eye became infected on Shabbat, and she screamed in pain, but no one paid attention to her. Eventually, says the Gemara, Akar Einah, her eye became dislocated from the infection. She had a terrible eye infection, her eye actually popped out. The next day, Mar Shmuel went and taught, with regard to an eye that rebelled, it is permitted to apply kechol on Shabbat. And the reason is that we see that the eyes are connected to the heart. And therefore, says the Mishnah Brura on the halachas of fast days, if one has eye pain on a fast day, it is considered as potentially life-threatening, and therefore one is not allowed to fast. And that's the beauty and the sensitivity of the Chachamim. So my dear friends, stay connected to Hashem. Listen to the messages that Hashem gives us. Know that the virus, which didn't just begin in 2000 and end in 2021, we can outsmart ourselves. The way to treat any virus is to honor our relationship to Hashem, honor our relationship with our bodies, eat in a manner where we're eating in a godly manner, live in a godly manner. And with that, I wish you all health, vibrant health, until 120 years and longer.
Chazak v'baruch.